When a member of the royal family is led away by police, is he treated any differently to the rest of us? Now, I've spent years in and out of custody suites as a former detective, and a lot of people have asked me, do the rules suddenly bend? Do the police roll out velvet rope and offer a comfortable armchair and serve up a piping hot cup of Earl Grey? I'm Caroline Mitchell, former police detective and crime thriller author. Let's get into it. Nobody wants to spend time in police custody, not even police officers, believe me. Firstly, it smells, and these would not be smells that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor would be accustomed to. We're talking BO, vomit, urine from people who have chosen to pee on the floor of their cell. And then there's the incredibly stale air because there's no windows, and the sharp tang of disinfectant as it competes with the latest mess. Normal suspects, well, they'd usually have to wait in a holding cell as there's always a queue in the custody block. At least there was in the one I was accustomed to. But bigger stations usually do have more than one harassed looking sergeant booking people in. They often sit behind a spit-proof glass, and believe me, there's a reason for that. And they sit on a platform near the custody cells where women are kept separate to men. And there's always only one person per cell. Nearby are the small boxy interview rooms, airless and windowless and usually stinking of the previous occupant. Our lucky custody sergeant not only gets to inhale the questionable smells, they also have the joys of hearing the constant shouts and screams of prisoners too. And they often have dirty protests. The prisoners, that is, not the custody sergeant. And sometimes they do far worse. But let's not get into that. Let's just say that for a regular human being, being booked into custody is not a pleasant experience. And don't get me started on the small depressing cells, the cold metal toilet and the microwaved mush that is passed off for food. But did Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor have all of his senses assaulted? Did he taste the joy of custody tea? Or did he eat the microwaved food? Well, here's the cold, hard truth. In the UK, the custody process is governed by PACE, which is the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. It's the Bible of British policing, and under that framework, this baseline does not change just because your brother is the king. But while the law is the same, the logistics, the security and the sheer atmospheric pressure in the station, for cases as big as this with the whole world watching, it would feel like a pressure cooker, and that's where things get complicated. Let's face it, we're not talking about a standard interview. This isn't Billy Burglar up to his old tricks and funding his love for meth. We're talking about an investigation into misconduct in public office, involving some of the most sensitive files in the country. This is a suspect who, until very recently, had a permanent armed detail. So let's pull back the curtain. I'm going to walk you through exactly what I think happened to Andrew from the moment those plainclothes officers from Thames Valley Police stepped onto the Sandringham gravel. And we'll talk about the 11 hours he spent in Aylsham Police Station to his release under investigation. I'll tell you what happens to a royal belt and shoelaces when they're booked in, and why this particular arrest is the most significant legal event the British monarchy has faced in nearly 400 years. Now, you won't have seen any caged police van for this arrest. On that morning in Wood Farm, it was a convoy of unmarked SUVs and plainclothes officer from Thames Valley. Discreet but heavy, because when you're dealing with a suspect who spent 66 years surrounded by a security bubble, the wheels of justice, well, they look a little different on the outside, even if the law inside the station is exactly the same. So the investigation is led by Thames Valley Police. They're looking into misconduct in public office, specifically whether Andrew was playing fast and loose with sensitive government documents during his decade as a trade envoy. Now, I've seen the comment sections online and people are asking, why the theatrics? Why not hold a voluntary interview? Why not invite him in for a little chat? And sure, it can happen, but an arrest isn't all about the optics, it's about control. They would have arrested him under pace because it's necessary. Officers need to secure evidence before it's destroyed, and they also need to stop what's called witness contamination, which is police speak for making sure no one's getting a phone call that they shouldn't. It also gives us power of entry because when you arrest someone, it triggers sections of PACE, like Section 18, that lets us turn over their properties. As the reports confirmed, while Andrew was sitting in a plastic bucket chair in Norfolk, teams were simultaneously walking through Wood Farm and Royal Lodge. In this game, controlling the evidence is as important as controlling the person. So the convoy, well, it pulls into Alsham Police Station, and now if you're picturing high stakes interrogation rooms with a swinging light bulb, well, forget it. The king of the castle here is the custody officer, and he is usually a weary sergeant who's seen everything from shoplifters to strippers, and frankly a former royal is a pain in the backside because their accountability, it goes through the roof. If anything goes wrong, the custody sergeant's neck is literally on the line. But having said that, their job, well, it's not to build a case, it's to make sure everything is legal and logged. The welfare of the person detained in their care is paramount. And I'll quickly mention my next case, which actually talks about Jeffrey Epstein. So if you'd like to hear my take on that, then now is the time to subscribe and like and press the bell. But back to Andrew. First up, the booking in. The sergeant would have looked Andrew in the eye and asked the same questions they would ask Billy Burglar. Name, address, any thoughts of self-harm, are you on any medication, list them all down, any allergies, intolerances. Every questionnaire box on the online system must be ticked and noted. And this is where the risk assessment gets interesting. For a high-profile suspect, the vulnerability box, well, it's not just a tick. The sergeant has to decide, and he has to take responsibility for his decisions. Does he need level 4 observation, for example? Do we need a forensic medic on standby? It would have been the most stressful 20 minutes of that sergeant's week. Then the rights are covered. For one, the right to have someone informed, and that would have made for a very awkward phone call to Buckingham Palace. Then the right to a solicitor. Duty solicitors are always available for free, but I can pretty much guarantee that Andrew paid for his own legal advice. Then the right to the PACE Code of Practice, a book so thick and dry, believe me, it can cure insomnia. And then the great equalizer, the search. And this really is the moment that reality hits for anybody who is brought into custody. It doesn't matter if you spent your life in palaces. In the UK custody suite, everybody loses their laces. Under PACE, we take anything you could use to hurt yourself or someone else. Your tie, gone. Your belt, gone. That nice expensive watch on your wrist, bagged and tagged. Cash, coins, receipts, everything is listed and signed for. Usually the arresting officer conducts the search, working with the custody sergeant as they go through the list, and things are seized and bagged and put away in custody for safekeeping. But then the searching officer will run what we call the wand over the suspect in custody. Now, it's not from Harry Potter, it's actually a device to check if they have any weapons on them, much as you'd see in like airport security in the old days. And Andrew, well, he wouldn't have been exempt from that. It's all about accountability and ticking every box. So over the arms, up and down and between the legs, then a male officer would have continued and patted him down. We used to ask the suspect if they had anything sharp in their pockets, and we'd say, have you anything that would harm you or me? I'm not sure if the former prince was asked this question though. We would then check their arms, their waistband, their pockets, and it's a bit like the pat down that you get when you're stopped at airport security. His pockets would have been turned out as he was patted down, and I imagine the officer conducting the search, they will not forget that for a while. And because this is a documents and data type investigation, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's phone wouldn't just be put in a locker, it's Exhibit A, and that is going straight to a digital forensics lab. For 12 hours, he wasn't a duke, a prince or a sir. He was a DP, a detained person. And now I wasn't there, so I'm only relaying the strict PACE procedures, but as far as I'm aware and as far as I'm concerned, his Royal Protection Officer would have been stopped at the airlock. They're armed, and firearms are strictly forbidden in a custody suite. They would be cooling their jets in the station canteen or a side room or even outside of custody, but not standing at the cell door. And once the belt is off and the shoelaces are taken, the tea, well, it's a standard police issue, so do not expect a porcelain cup, expect a polystyrene one. Then we get to the main event, the interview under caution. Now, I've sat in these rooms countless times conducting interviews of my own. It was one of the things I enjoyed most about being in the police. But the rooms, well, they're designed to be boring. 4 walls, a table, a few hard bucket plastic chairs, and a digital recorder and camcorder that captures every sigh, every cough, and every long, awkward silence. Andrew would have been sat there with his solicitor. He would have already received private legal counsel. And let me tell you, when you're dealing with a suspect of this calibre, the no comment strategy is almost always a guarantee. Why? Well, it's because misconduct in public office is such a complex, document-heavy beast. It's not like a "where were you on the night of the 14th" kind of chat. It's a "why did you forward this commercial briefing on Afghan uranium to a convicted sex offender 5 minutes after receiving it" kind of chat. And there would have been a very senior officer in interview, but I do wonder if there was an experienced detective constable present for the interview too, because in reality it's DCs who usually do all the interviewing day in and day out, and they do have the most up-to-date training on it. A full strategy would have been conducted prior to interview either way, and the structure is methodical. We establish identity, we explain the caution, you do not have to say anything, and then we start laying out the bricks of the wall. We will put the allegations to them, we will show the emails that we possibly have, and we will explore the account. People sometimes think that 12 hours in a station means 12 hours of grilling. It really doesn't. And you're not allowed as police officers to keep repeating the same questions over and over again. Neither are you allowed to stand over your interviewee or pace the room or hammer your fists against the table like they do on TV. That might have been the way pre-pace perhaps, but it's certainly not now. And that, my dear, is known as oppression, and it's definitely not allowed. Not for Billy Burglar and not for a former prince. No, he would have had most likely an hour of questioning, followed by a 3-hour break while the legal team deliberates, while the custody sergeant does a welfare check, and while the officers do their search, and while detectives review their notes and speak with the CPS. But for something like this, it's a slow, grinding process, and while detective constables, as I said, they usually take the lead, high-ranking officers, they would have been all over this. So let's talk about the bit that you actually clicked for. Does a royal get VIP treatment? Legally, no. PACE Code C is very clear. The process is the same for a duke, as I said, Billy Burglar, but practically, well, the logistics would be a bit of a nightmare. Normally, a police station is a constant revolving door of suspects, people in, people out, Serco van collecting prisoners, suspects answering bail, suspects being interviewed. It's always busy. There are always queues. But for this arrest, Alsham Police Station would have been on total lockdown and their prisoners moved elsewhere. The police really have to manage security, media and movement, and the brief should be clear on this. Andrew's Royal Protection Officers should not have been allowed in that room. Once you're in custody, no matter who you are, you pretty much belong to the police. But you can bet your pension that senior officers were sweating over the risk assessment. Every move through the corridor, every trip to the toilet, it would have been choreographed to avoid leaks or a security breach. And Andrew's details would have been on the online custody system, but strictly controlled with very restricted access. And if you're an officer not related to an investigation and you gain access to his online details, you could lose your job. The police IT system logs every single person who views the record, and sometimes a curious officer has been served with gross misconduct papers just for having a little peek at a celebrity's custody log. Andrew's details would have been on the online custody system too, as I said, but very strictly controlled. And all of this attention is not because he's anyone special, it's because having a former prince in the cell is so massive that the staff end up being more rigid about the rules, mainly to cover their own backs. They know the world is watching. They know if they skip one welfare check or mess up evidentially, the most expensive lawyers in London will be all over them. But you can take comfort in the fact that he probably was left sitting in a police custody cell. Now, those cells are as basic as they get. They're small, usually with hard cement floor. Everything is cold and horrible, with thin foam mattresses with a blue plastic casing, cameras, a stainless steel toilet with no privacy, although when you use it your image is pixelated out. There are other cells for vulnerable victims with no toilets, so when they need to use the loo they're escorted to a proper toilet by the police. And I imagine he would have been placed in one of these cells, the door left open with a police officer sitting outside it. This sort of watch is usually reserved for vulnerable people, and I've done it many times in the past with regular people myself. But given the high profile of this case, I think that's most likely for our former prince. But there is no royal wing, and the toilet paper is like a sandpaper. There are no fancy cells for celebs or the upper classes, believe me. The food is microwaved, the tea is served in a polystyrene cup. This really would have brought him down to earth with a bump, as he spent his birthday in one of these cells. And it really would have been the best place for him, because it's safe, monitored, contained, and private from the outside world. So when all was done, when he was dealt with, he would have been spoken to in custody, and items that weren't seized for the investigation would have been returned, such as his shoelaces, pocket change and belt. And then he would have been instructed about next steps. And one very relieved custody sergeant would have been very happy to see him go. At about 7 p.m, Andrew was seen leaving the station in the back of a dark Range Rover, and he was released under investigation. To the public, that might sound like a win for him because he hadn't been charged. But it's not a win, far from it. This would have been of no surprise to the police. Because when it comes to crimes like these, police must play the long game. Rush in with a charge now and you could blow the whole case. No, this is more of a to be continued, and it means the police now have his devices like his iPads, his encrypted phones and his laptops. And don't forget, they also have the Epstein files. The detectives are now going to spend months, maybe even longer, cross-referencing those digital footprints. They will build a file as thick as a phone book and hand it to the Crown Prosecution Service. The CPS will then ask two main questions. Is there enough evidence to convict? And is it in the public interest to pursue the case? Let's hope it is. But now we need to talk about the charge itself, because this isn't some little slip-up. Misconduct in public office is a common law offence. That's old school law dating back centuries. Because it's common law, there's no statutory limit on the sentence. It carries a maximum life imprisonment. Life sentences for this are very rare and would be usually reserved for like the worst possible breaches in national security. But the fact it's on the table tells you how seriously CPS takes the abuse of trust element. More importantly, this is what we call an indictable only offence, and this means it cannot be dealt with by a magistrate. If this goes to trial, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor won't be in the small local court. He'll be standing in the dock at the Crown Court facing a jury of 12 ordinary citizens. For a man who spent all of his years being bowed to, he must have seen himself as untouchable. So what's the smoking gun in this? Well, according to reports from The Guardian and the BBC, this investigation is zeroing in on a December 2010 email. While serving as a trade envoy, Andrew allegedly forwarded a confidential brief to Jeffrey Epstein. And as I said, I'm covering that case next, so don't forget to subscribe. And this wasn't like lunch plans. This contained a list of high-value commercial opportunities in gold and uranium deposits in Afghanistan, specifically in the Helmand province, where British troops were literally on the ground at the same time. The allegation is that he used his taxpayer-funded access to feed investment leads to a convicted sex offender. And remember, the reason he was released under investigation rather than charged is the sheer volume of data. The police now have his current devices and whatever they find in the legacy crates at the Royal Lodge. They can also now match his personal device IDs to the ones found in the Epstein files. In a massive new development over the weekend, the Metropolitan Police have officially asked all current and former Royal Protection Officers who served Andrew to consider carefully if they have information regarding his links to Epstein. And if you're wondering if the royal family is going to swoop in and save him, well, that's not going to happen. Because if they're going to survive this, their allegiance must be with the crown. On the day of his arrest, King Charles III released a statement that sent shockwaves through the legal community. He said, and I quote, "The law must take its course." He followed that up by pledging the royal family's full and wholehearted support and cooperation with the police. In the world of constitutional law, that is like the king handing over the keys to the castle. It's a clear signal. The era of royal immunity is over. And that is huge because, folks, we're in uncharted waters here. This is the first time a senior member of the royal family has been arrested in nearly 400 years. So whether this leads to a trial in Crown Court or just vanishes into the archives, one thing is certain: the velvet rope has been cut. To find the last time a senior member of the British royal family was formally arrested and detained, you have to go back to 1647 and King Charles I. And back then it took a bloody civil war and an act of high treason to put a royal behind bars. Since the 17th century, the royals have lived inside a carefully upholstered version of history. And when they've had brushes with the law, like Princess Anne's Dog Act case in 2002, well, that was handled by court summons. No handcuffs, no unmarked convoys, and certainly no police cells. By arresting Andrew on February 19, 2026, the police didn't just detain a man, they effectively ended a centuries-old era of deference. For 400 years, the assumption has been that the palace would manage its own scandals behind closed doors. But the moment Andrew was arrested, the British Constitution, it just shifted. And it proved that in 2026, the divine right of kings has finally been replaced by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. And this is huge. It's not just a royal scandal, it's a total dismantling of the institutional immunity. But while Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is facing a charge that carries a maximum life imprisonment, the days of the Tower of London and the Executor's Axe are firmly in the rearview mirror. Because back in the day, treason was a one-way ticket to the scaffold. But in 1998, the Tony Blair government closed that chapter of British history. As part of the Crime and Disorder Act 1998, the death penalty was abolished for treason, and they said it was to bring the UK in line with the European Convention on Human Rights. And I dare say Andrew was quite pleased about that, at least. So what's next for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor? Well, for now, it's a case of watch this space. And look, guys, I wasn't there. I don't know every detail of what happened inside custody. I am talking from my many years' experience of working in the police. I know what pace requires and how it would normally run. So if you found this deep dive into the royal arrest helpful, hit the like button and subscribe. I'll be following the CPS decision closely as digital forensics come back, and I cover all sorts of cases on my channel, so check them out. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay curious. Bye bye for now.